It's quite extraordinary, isn't it, that without even seeing the Tucker Carlson interview with Putin this evening, the European Union is already kicking off, I think is the expression. And because they don't like the idea that Tucker Carlson is assisting Putin. Now, it's the job of a journalist, I think, to interview people. It doesn't matter whether these people are good or bad. They interview people and they find out more. They get these people to talk more about themselves, about their plans, about their prospects. Yet, of course, as things might be censored. They might not answer the questions you really want them to answer. But there's often quite a lot which is telling about the questions they refuse to answer, the questions they say they don't want to be asked, and so on. There's a lot we can learn from the lacunae, from the absences, from the gaps. And if we go back, Milosevic was interviewed. Saddam Hussein famously was interviewed by what's the lady? I can't remember her name anyway. Fidel Castro was interviewed. Menachem Begin, Sadat were interviewed, I think, almost at the same time by the same person. There is a tradition of interviewing people that are not necessarily our friends, and I think it's as important as the war reporter who is on the line, who is with the troops, who is able to report back about the battle. That goes all the way back to the Crimean War. I think the first reporter who was with the troops was in the Crimean War, and that's how we got the report of the charge of the Light Brigade, the story on which Tennyson based his poem. Tennyson wasn't there. You wouldn't know it because he managed to give the impression with the beat of the horse's hooves that he really was there, but he wasn't. And Guy Verhofstadt, one of the European MPs, has said that Tucker Carlson must be a war criminal, must be treated as a war criminal, must be sanctioned. He's no longer a newspaper reporter, he's a propagandist, they say. And again, threatening sanctions. No one in Europe is sort of screaming out and supporting his activities. Well, I think they should. I don't think it matters whether you like Tucker Carlson or whether you don't like Tucker Carlson. What he's doing is part of the tradition of reporting. Personally, I don't think very much of Tucker Carlson, but I think this is an important thing to do. And as I said earlier, I think this is the first interview that President Putin has given since October 2021, I think. And, of course, it's the first interview Putin has given post-mortem from the fridge, from his position as a frozen individual occupying almost the same space as a bag of frozen peas. And it will be interesting to see what sort of life he can inject into that identity. And of course, there will be speculation about whether it's really him. Of course, there'll be that speculation. And so give him the opportunity. Give people the opportunity to look at the person who is being interviewed and say, well, is that the person that I met a few years ago? Maybe you don't remember. Maybe the doppelganger is so good. Maybe it's not a doppelganger. Maybe it really is Putin. There is an argument that would go that there are many people who want Putin's job. Actually, I disagree with that argument. I don't think there are very many people who want Putin's job, and rather like becoming the Sultan, those people who are vying for control they also know that their lives are threatened simply because they're in the running. And no, nobody is itching, I think, to replace Putin at this particular moment. And there's also, Putin is surrounded by a series of groups. And when I lived in Moscow, it used to be 3 groups. And it was always interesting to see which group was more powerful at any one time. And you'd know because people people that I would know would suddenly have jobs. And then I'd go back to Moscow and I'd find they didn't have jobs. And it was quite a good indicator of which faction around the Kremlin had got the upper hand. And all of them saw Putin as the key to their own power. And Putin, I think, enjoyed playing one group off against another as well. But Putin was controlled, or Putin is controlled. Putin is not a free agent, but he is controlled by powers that he is in so many ways responsible for creating. So it's an interesting problem. I'm immensely looking forward to seeing the Tucker Carlson interview this evening at 11 o'clock. And I'm going to avoid making any judgment until I've seen it. But the EU, the idea that the idea that cancel culture could have got to such an extent that people are cancelled before they've even opened their mouth. This is like what's that Tom Cruise film, Minority Report? It's like Minority Report. It's bad. It's bad. And though we may draw conclusions and we may think, well, we don't really like Tucker Carlson, we're a series of societies ruled by law. And yes, indeed, there are situations in both the UK and the US and Europe where we have defied the law. The British government is pretty well defined now by defying the Supreme Court. I think the concept of law still survives. And one of the concepts there is that you're not incarcerated, you're not punished until you've actually done something wrong.